Hi, my name is Andy Señor Jr., and I am one of the directors of Revolution Rent.
My name is Victor Patrick Alvarez, and I'm also one of the directors of Revolution Rent.
My mom is having a fit because I'm going to go put up rent in Cuba.
Tú vas a Cuba a hacer un show cuando Cuba está sufriendo.
This is directly for the Cuban people.
You're not going to make an impact, and you're going to leave Cuba the same as when you arrived.
If I can just affect a small group of people, that's my part, that's enough.
Para mí, la locura más grande que puede haber.
I feel incredibly at home.
It's crazy to be here after wanting to be here for such a long time.
We're calling it Broadway Survivor. You were put on the island and you have so many tools to deal with.
Ay, no hay agua.
They're dealing with life and death issues.
Nos han quitado la capacidad de luchar por lo que realmente quiere.
¿Qué quieres?
Libertad.
It's difficult.
No están aquí de grupo, están individualmente aquí.
¡Libertad! No.
That's your group.
The power just went out again. We're working on that.
That is a trailer from the HBO documentary Revolution Rent, debuting on HBO and HBO Max on June 15th. And this is Factual America. We're brought to you by Alamo Pictures, an Austin and London-based production company making documentaries about America for international audiences. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood, and today we're talking about Rent, the Tony and Pulitzer-Prize winning musical which celebrates the 25th anniversary of its Broadway premiere on June 15th. We'll be looking at how the musical's message still resonates today, especially as captured by the HBO documentary Revolution Rent, about the first commercial American production performed in Havana, Cuba in over 50 years. It is then my great pleasure to welcome to the show the filmmakers, stage director and filmmaker Andy Señor Jr., who played Angel in the Broadway play and directed the Havana production, and producer and co-director of the film, Victor Patrick Alvarez. Andy, Victor, welcome to Factual America. Andy, how are you doing? Where are you coming to us from these days?
Hi, Matthew. I'm very happy to be here. I am actually in Miami. Although I live in Barcelona, I am in Miami for the premiere of the film.
And Victor, you've got a tropical locale there as well. Where are we? Where are you hiding out these days?
Tropical locale.
I'm in an undisclosed location in Palm Beach, Florida. No, I'm joking. I'm actually in my mom's garden right now. Happy to be here. I'm in my mom's garden in Palm Beach, Florida, where I'm currently residing.
Well, I'm in, obviously, as you know, I'm based in England, and I haven't seen sun like that in a long time, as you probably can tell.
Hence all the blackness around you.
Yeah, it's all black here. You know, it's a shout out to the studio here, but they are a bunch of heavy metal guys, so everything's kind of dark and black and goth here. So, but they do a brilliant job. So, again, the film is Revolution Rent, as we've said once, if not twice, debuts on HBO and HBO Max on June 15th. So thanks so much again for coming on to the podcast, and thanks so much for making this film. It's such an uplifting film, I found it. So, without further ado, Andy, maybe just for our listeners and watchers out there, what is Revolution Rent about?
Revolution Rent basically it takes place in 2014 when the Ministry of Culture of Cuba and the Nederlander organization reach out to myself, Andy, to go put up the first musical, Broadway musical in 50 years, done in co-production between the United States and Cuba. What makes that particularly special was the fact that I was in Rent and that I'm also Cuban American. Cuban American from Miami, from parents who left Cuba during the revolution and sworn to never go back. So that felt like that was a pretty cool subject for a documentary. And
so as you've already said, I was going to ask you who had the crazy idea to try to stage this in Cuba, but it was the
Ministry of Culture. Yeah, they're the ones who chose Rent.
Oh my goodness! And then you were you were crazy enough to say yes.
I was crazy enough to say yes. There was no thinking about it, really. It was like, I've been saying that if it was anything else that wasn't Rent, I would have maybe, been like, oh, I don't know, da da da. But when the fact that it was Rent, it's just not negotiable. I was gonna go put up the show in Cuba, because if it wasn't me, it was gonna be somebody else, and that wasn't gonna happen. I was gonna go do it.
Thank God.
It was, yeah, it's as you said, it's 2014. This is pre any sort of normalization of relations. I mean, for both of you, Victor, what was it like landing in Havana, Cuba in 2014?
Ooh, I was very, 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 very nervous. I had done 2 films prior to this one. One of them called Cuba American, with director Jose Enrique Pardo and Andy Garcia, and then the other one, 13 Million Voices, about the Juanes Peace concert, which happened in I think 2 years prior to this adventure.
And Andy, as I've already said, I mean, but this must have been, and it's documented in the film. It's very emotional for you, isn't it? Given your family background,
Yeah, I mean, my dad passed years before this, and there was always just like all the stories that he shared about Cuba, and my curiosity to go and see everything that they talked about, and to understand who I am and my culture so much more. So when that plane was past the water mark and was going right over the land, the mountains, the green, I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe I'm landing in Cuba right now. I got really emotional thinking about my dad during that moment.
And then, so staging Rent in Havana, is this the hardest thing you've ever done?
Staging Rent in Havana, was that the hardest thing I've ever done? No, I think this documentary is.
We're going to get onto that, actually, because I was going to.
Staging Rent in Havana.
Yeah, because it is obviously, if listeners haven't put 2 and 2 together, it is 2021, and that was 2014. So
exactly, putting this documentary together, getting it funded, keeping the lights on, keeping people working, getting it into festivals, getting it sold. What it took, and I'll talk about this documentary to get this to the finish line. It took everything. It really took everything.
I was going to ask you later, will you ever make another doc?
Absolutely.
Oh, excellent. Well, then we'll talk more about that. But because there are people who we have people come on who have maybe their first doc and it's a passion project and they make brilliant ones, and then they're just like, I'm never going through that hell again.
How, like, I think it's like, my next documentary is going to be one location, a place that's, not, I don't have to travel to, I have access to, I think you get more like bougie about what kind of documentary you're going to make,
I gotta be honest, I love documentary. I love the medium because there's no rules, and it feels like a collage. Like I feel like I'm collaging, using whatever I want to storytell and however I want to do it.
Yeah, and there's no money either, but that's another story.
And that's the hard part.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the art. I really, really, genuinely love the art form.
Well, I think, and it's an art form as you've captured it in this film. It's a lovely artful film. So I think that's.
Thank you. And I mean, you see a lot of documentaries, obviously. So like how I'm gonna, these are the first conversations we're having with people outside our friends and family. So like, as a documentary, how does it for you? How does it? What's the question? How does it? What resonates with you?
What resonates? And you know what? You're also one of the first guests I've ever had ask me a question. So this is very, I love this. I have had one other documentarian. We got into a big discussion about some things, but most of the time, no, it's a one-way street. I do appreciate that. Well, how does it resonate? I think what resonates, I should maybe speak more personally.
Yeah, please.
Because a lot of, we've had plenty of these on. There's some great docs out there, and I'm glad they're made, but they can be about some very difficult subjects. Yours has some difficult subjects in it as well, but yours is, as I said, I think hopefully in the intro, I found it uplifting. I mean, it's a celebration of life, of humanity, you know, and I thought you captured the rawness very well, and also, I think I guess it's almost cliche, but I use it a lot. But the great docs are more than just about the subject that you think they're about. So this is more than just about, so in your case, it's more than just about Rent, the production being put on in Havana.
Absolutely.
It is about things that, happy to go stream of consciousness if we want. But in terms of things that, I thought we'd discuss is like, it's a walk down memory lane for you. It's also, I mean, is Havana 2014, in some ways, I mean, a lot of people, you've got all the pictures of the 1950s cars on the road and that B-roll and stuff, but it's also, is it a bit of New York City in 1996, in terms of issues that Havana's dealing with that maybe, were more present in the 90s. It's about the way these people. I thought you had some great scenes of how people are living, and struggling, and how that ties into to Rent.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is, who would have thought?
I certainly had no idea. Again, I was just going into to put up the show, but then in the documentary, my mom comes and steals the whole thing.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, and I must say that was the most. There's more than a few poignant moments, but I found that one scene certainly in the cemetery is
yes,
that was emotional. That was and what she's and I think again you've documented that well. I mean, that's as you say, the power of documentary. You didn't know you were going to capture these scenes.
No, when my mom has that big breakdown, that's a moment where I was shooting that with my iPhone in the hotel room, and at that moment I had to am I her son, and I put the phone down and console her, or do I continue filming? And those were the more difficult moments for me personally throughout the process. I'm so glad that I continued filming as her son.
And then and also, yes, exactly. And what you've been able to capture. I mean, I know it it's not a spoiler alert, really. I mean, at the end of the film, we know that unfortunately your mother has passed on a few years after the film was made, and yet you've got this. You've captured this as a son. You must be so, and your siblings must be so thankful for.
Yeah, I haven't quite been able to figure out what the great easy sentence is for me to describe what it is, because it's. I did an interview where it's like it's life affirming, but it doesn't quite capture the surreal, blissful, beautiful, melancholic thing of being able to capture your family and time capsule them, and that they're immortalized and this story will be told forever. It's very rare, and I feel very wowed by that. Very lucky.
And then there's again the beauty of it's the nature of film anyway, but certainly documentary is if you were to try to write that all down, you'd have to be one of the greatest authors ever to try to actually capture that in writing. But you just let the cameras roll and you capture it, and it's more it resonates better, or at least more easily. Although it wasn't easy, So yes, I think that's what for me personally, I loved it. I think it's seeing Cuba. I know it was back in 2014, 15, but just even seeing Cuba, and as an American citizen myself, and for the longest time not being allowed to go there, unless I had special permission, and I've never had the same that luxury. And I guess it could go now, and would love to see it. And everyone has all said, well, you need to go see it before it changes. But at the same time, that's an odd feeling too, isn't it? Because the reason it looks the way it is because of the history we've been dealing with for like the last 50 years.
1,000%.
Yeah.
1,000%.
You know,
Yes.
so it's crumbling. Is that really actually something that's,
And it's crumbling even more now.
Yeah.
Well, it's crumbling even more now. Yeah, it's like, you know, we're sitting here talking about this was 7 years ago, but I feel like when we left, I feel like Cuba just stopped, just froze, and it's still there, and in that froze, it just deteriorated, and you know, when you hear stories of certain people, you know, who went to school there, and then you know, the contractors of the government are going to turn their school, their childhood into a hotel. You know, it's just like, and that was the future of where it was headed. You know, it's just that things like that, and then now without any production, you know, you wonder so much, and yeah, you know, that there's a special period in the 90s, and what they're saying Cuba is today is even worse than the special period in the 90s, which is it's mind blowing. I don't even know what to say to it actually. It hurts, you know.
And then if I was to make another comment about the film, I am personally, again, a big fan of observational, and although this is not strictly an observational or cinema verite or whatever you want to say, is, you know, you're not, again, you let those cameras roll, you capture certain moments, and you're not, I mean, you can get into a philosophical debate about how objective anyone can be as a filmmaker or whatever, but you're not trying to make any sort of strong, you know, any political statements. It's letting the film speak for itself. And yes, there's lots of, I think it's well documented.
You know why? We don't need to say anything. Because it's all there. It's like they're saying it. The streets are saying it. The relationships are saying it. The pain in my mom in her eyes is saying it. It's all there. We don't have to say anything.
it's if I may say so myself, as someone who has no roots in the community, but it does seem like one big giant dysfunctional family in some ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. I won't make any other editorial comments like that, just in case I get in trouble. But but okay. So you go to Havana, and that's the other thing. I mean, did you from the get-go you knew you had a doc on your hands? Did you? Because you're filming scenes around the table with the family before you even go to Havana.
Yeah, that's coming from like a space of like, well, you know, if before that scene, there was the scene where I'm just on my iPhone and I'm like, my mom is having a fit, right? And it's like, and then I go into the kitchen with the iPhone. Actually, it was my iPad, and so, you know, from that moment forward, it's like I need to capture all of this because no one's going to believe any of this.
Yeah, and Matthew, as someone who's an outsider on the community, that conversation that happened on that table is what every conversation that every Cuban American that wants to go over there and do something that happens. So that's a metaphor for every single conversation about anybody who wants to see their birthright, more or less. So, you know, in that sense.
And indeed, everyone's so sincere and passionate about their views and their feelings. You know, your brother-in-law making his comments about, you know, and then one sister saying that, and another sister, and then
and listen, they're right. He's right. Like when I watched that now in the trailer, it's like, you're gonna leave the Cuba the same. I was like, yeah, it's worse actually. It's worse now. It really, it's like it wasn't about me going to save anything.
I mean, there's a bit of that in the film. There's artists who feel like, I mean, you're making a difference. Do you think maybe that's overblown somewhat, or do you think that's, or maybe understanding the limits of anyone's abilities?
I think that the difference is is made in the small steps, and it's in when you look at those people's lives, you know, a handful of them are dramatically impacted by my having gone there. That choice, I mean, they have completely different lives now. It's not like, oh, I changed people's lives, but that it's just what we do. Jonathan Larson sat down at a piano for 7 years and wrote an incredible musical that gave me my life. And, you know, how that was, which was the whole inspiration behind me going, was because how am I not going to go do that in Cuba?
And so if we do go back to the production, I mean, we do see glimpses of it. The one thing we don't see, but nor should we, is the actual full performance and how, you know, necessarily how the audience reacts. But how did you find Rent resonates 20 years later? I think even one of your costume people said it's now a period piece. You know, foreign audiences, Cubans. How did you find that?
They loved it. It was sold out. We ran for 4 months, I believe it was. It was sold out. Standing ovations, repeat offenders over and over and over again. But remember, just not loving Rent, but they loved the musical theater experience, because they hadn't done a musical there in 50 years in that capacity. So they were, you know, not only blown away by watching the show and its subject, but seeing young Cuban actors, you know, in a musical like and seeing them seeing them in collaboration with an American company after the normalization talks, and in the middle of all of that happening was a window of hope and exuberance, and tangibly. And I feel like at that moment, Rent was the liberation in a theatrical way.
And in terms of the arts and theater scene, I I actually, and I'm old enough to have been to the old Soviet Union, but I think, you know, are they stuck in time? Are they still doing versions of Oklahoma? I mean, are in terms of
their theater is way more risque and more and way more evolved than Rent. So I thought it was like, oh yeah, we're gonna do Rent, and then I got to Cuba, and then they took me to see a show, and I was like, whoa. It's like, you know, like it was like intense because, you know, they can't gather on the streets and protest and say the things that they want to say. So they put all their politics and all their expression in their theater, where it's a safer space to do it. And
well, there is precedent there. There is similarities in that sense. You know, playwrights and people like that in the Eastern Bloc and everything have
absolutely,
you know. But no, that's very interesting.
That's the magic of theater.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, what was it like being, because you know, Americans living, you know, Cuban Americans, but living there for several months pre-normalization? I mean, what was that like? I mean, you've got some great scenes you've captured. One of my favorites is you going to the doctor. That's my favorite. I love that doctor. She doles out more than just medicine.
Medicine for the soul.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
He was intense. Well, you know, about Cuban life, like, I just couldn't believe when I was just walking the streets that, you know, walking past, like, the theater was in the same neighborhood where my mother grew up, and my grandfather had a house. And you know, I grew up in Miami, but I always loved the New York City life and the European life. And to me, it was like Havana was this like mixture of all these things that was like, and seeing all these, like, the Latin, like Cubans all like selling out a theater and going to see the theater every single night. I was like, this is what I want in Miami. How cool would this be? So it felt, and it just felt very alive, limited in resources, but abundant in spirit, and infectious.
Amazing. And so there is also lessons we can learn, isn't there, in terms about attitude towards life?
1,000%. Yes, I think that, you know, a lot has been stripped away from the Cuban in Cuba, except their spirit. That's not something that can be taken away.
We'll be right back with Andy Señor Jr. and Victor Patrick Alvarez, the co-directors of the HBO documentary Revolution Rent. Art and entertainment inspire each of us in different ways. But have you ever wondered what inspires the people who create our cultural touchstones? On the Spark Parade podcast, your host Adam Owens geeks out with artists and entertainers about their cultural spark of inspiration. Everything from Shakespeare to South Park. You'll hear from artists like Connor Oberst on Northern Exposure, Roisin Murphy on Terrence Conrad's The House Book, and Adrian Young on Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. The Spark Parade, where artists reveal their cultural inspirations to spark the inspiration in you. Find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Alamo Pictures to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America.
Con mi canción, gloria para esta joven promesa que ha roto su oportunidad. Gloria antes que el virus al fin venza en el ocaso. Gloria y mi vida sin salvar se va. Y así podría aceptar el final se va.
Welcome back to Factual America with the filmmakers Andy Señor Jr. and Victor Patrick Alvarez, co-directors of Revolution Rent. Debuts on June 15th on HBO and HBO Max, the 25th anniversary of the Broadway premiere of Rent. So we've been talking about, well, it's been a great conversation we've been having about your experiences putting Rent on, your filming in Cuba. I mean, speaking of which, Victor, I mean, were you able to film freely in Cuba? It certainly gives the feeling that you were able to, but how was that? Were there restrictions on what you were able to do?
No restriction. I think the restriction was out of respect. And, you know, I always told Andy, I was like, you know, this film, you know, because of Andy Señor and, you know, documenting him and following him, I've always told him like this is a sacred experience, you know. And so I didn't, you know, as someone who's known a lot about the culture and Cuba, like I could have went there and really stir the pot, you know, but that's not why I was there. So I really treated this project, you know, and Broadway too, because it was Rent that went there. You know, it was Jonathan Larson's play that went there. It was Andy Señor, you know, and it was America and Cuba working together. Why would I sabotage that? So I always seemed to, you know, and, you know, just a little fun, you know, there was following, there were people listening and asking questions, but there was a very, very high respect. And I'll never forget it. The last day, when I left and after we took Andy's mom there, this guy, you know, this is a really, really funny story is we're at the airport and one of the people at the airport, they tapped me on the shoulder, like, hey, you need to come. And I was like, oh, this is it. This is where they take my hard drive, they take my camera. I was like, this is it. I've been waiting for this. A year filming, I've been waiting. And this guy, you know, I sit in this room, it's a very small room, you know, you can tell it wasn't too much. And I was like, okay, this is it. I felt totally, you know, pure, you know, my heart was there. My soul was there. I did what I was there to do. And he sat me down and in this very broken English accent, because my Spanish isn't too great. And he sat me down, he held my hand, and he said, "Thank you so much for everything you've done here." I was like, "What?" And I was like, and it kind of just blew my mind. I'll never forget it. He's like, we're going to put you in first class. Thank you. And I was just like, whoa.
Matthew, we got to know all the airport people. Like we were going in and out. We were going in and out. So we really were. We were going in and out of so much that like as soon as we arrived, they were like, "Andy, Patrick, come!" And they were like, I was like, "This is crazy." Yeah. It was like we had like open door policy in Cuba.
It's like hola,
And it's like, and here, here I am putting up a show. It's like, try to get any political person to have that kind of open door policy and that kind of treatment, Yeah,
no, it was a lot of love. I mean, I think everyone knew. I think everyone who was like knew what was going on in the world. They knew what our intentions were and who we were being, and that was very, when people know what's going on, that's the best environment. So.
There was a lot of love for us.
Yeah.
And there still is. And there still is. And a lot of respect and which I'm really grateful for.
So that love obviously served you well because it's, as we were referring to earlier, it's taken a little while to get to this moment. So what happened there? I mean, was this all on your own? You were doing this as sort of an indie, and then
we were doing it as I'll just like run through it. We were doing it as as a total indie, and then when we tried, to as soon as we finished everything, all the putting up the show and got back to the States, we, to be 100% transparent, we didn't have the rights for a whole year, and we got a cease and desist letter from Rhett saying that we couldn't do this documentary. And it was like, all right, how are we gonna tell this story? And then I was like, well, Patrick, we're gonna have to take a personal route and make it about my family, and then use whatever we need to use in a way that we can. And so we changed our focus, and we created a teaser that was a 10-minute version of what it would be, and we brought it back to Rent, and they were like, wow, this is beautiful.
And Neil saved the day.
And then Neil was like, I want to be executive producer of this, and he put in the first big chunk of money to make it happen. Neil and I did Rent. Neil Patrick Harris, him and I had done Rent together. That was my first time I did Rent, and Neil and I did it together. So then became the process of putting the documentary together, and that was like the juggling of like, how much politics do you put in, how much of Rent do you put in, how much of this guy Andy do you put in, like the typical storytelling balancing thing. Then it was like how trying to get it into the festivals. Then we ran out of money for a while, and then having people believe in the story, which was the people that believed in it and took us far. But there were mostly no's throughout the journey, mostly no's, and many reasons for us to just think that this isn't a story worth telling and sharing.
And so what kept you going when you kept getting these no's?
Honesty,
but for me, I think it was lack of agenda. I think because there was no agenda and it was just purely sharing, the sharing can happen at any time. The agenda, there's an end goal. But the sharing of it was clear that, well, we're going to share it, whether it's on YouTube for free or whatever it is. Like,
yeah. I was like, can I just put it on the internet? Like, whoa.
This is gonna get done. But the more that we waited, and the more that we worked on it, It also, I think it's, since this is for documentaries and a documentary podcast, Christine O'Malley and Doug Blush, who are pros in this, in the documentary world, no one we worked with before, really knew what we were doing from the documentary space. Yeah, I mean, like we had a lot of people that would come in and that would advise us. But as far as like the dirty work of producing every single day, Christine O'Malley was incredible and Doug, like knowing what to do with the cut and how to bring life to it. That's
trusting ourselves, like Doug really came in. It's like, it doesn't need to be anything else. This is it's all there, and thank God. Yeah.
And then it came at a perfect time because the 25th anniversary and then the pandemic and all this. It was like, of course, this is the perfect time to release this.
We had a documentarian on, actually the most recent one we've recorded, hasn't been released yet, but she's American French documentarian, but she's a believer in these little angels, and that she's not the first one to say that you've got on these projects. You have these the movie gods, however you look at it, your worldview, there's something that goes, it just gives you a little nudge that, no, this is going to work. This is the right thing.
There's a poetic air that you ride. And it's like the chi, right? It's just there, and if you just let go of what you think how you think it's all supposed to go, and you're just you just ride and you just continue to just take step by step. It's so hard to say because it's like it can be so maddening, but there's a truth that is just undeniable that's there, that if you just really listen to it, it will. For me, it's taken me to the most magical places, and it's taken me here, us here.
And so you two you've already said you would consider doing another doc. Is that right?
I would love it. Do you want to answer that, and then I'll answer it?
Yeah. I'm working on one right now. I'm really, really excited about it. It's essentially on. Can't really get too into detail, but it's on American education. Through independent education. And how teenagers can kind of what is the way to teach our youth? What is that? Is it through a curriculum or is it not? And I'm really, really excited about it. And I'm working on it right now, actually. So
that's very interesting, actually. It's to use the parlance of, well, maybe it's more of a business parlance. It's probably another one of these areas that's ripe for disruption, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Life is
breaking
ripe
them
for
all.
disruption.
We're revolutions all over. Well, which is a huge point to this film. I feel like, and thank God for companies like HBO who are, who gave us the platform to unleash it. Because, you think of HBO and you think of like, top of the top, and here we are, like them giving us a chance and like an organic perspective. And I'm really curious to see what flourishes throughout this type of distribution and this type of film. This film was made on our backs. This film was made with our hearts. And so for HBO to give us that opportunity, I'm so curious of how that's going to permeate into filmmakers around the world and documentarians. So I'm really excited about that, and thank God for them.
I think they definitely deserve a shout out, and I also think they know what they've seen, and they wouldn't just be doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. Let's put it that way. But well done. And Andy, what about you?
I'm still obviously still doing theater. I do have an itch to act again. And as far as documentary, I really do love it. And there's no particular thoughts on what that might be right now. I'm mostly curious to, I need to finish this journey, which is now releasing the film and a large part of documentary I'm learning and I've heard is how it exists out in the world after you make it. And so that's a big blind spot that I have right now. So I'm excited to see how this lives, how it's received, what conversations does it provoke or doesn't at all. And I have no idea. So I'm curious about, what's next.
If I may give my own personal feedback, and I know you've got a writer credit on this as well. I mean, I hope you make another one. I think it would, and I hope you team up with Victor as well. I think you've done you've made a lovely film.
Yeah, I think Andy and I, we have, before we go out of this world, I think we got one more Cuban project.
Something in the chest.
Something. I don't know, but soon.
And if we haven't scared you off, we'd love to have you back on again when you do whether it's that Cuban project or possibly that education project, Victor, or whatever is next.
I would love to, yeah.
In your careers. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, man.
It's been a pleasure, honor to meet you. I was really enjoyed it, and yes, best of luck with the release, and I'm sure it will do quite well. So
Awesome.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
A big thank you again to Andy Señor Jr. and Victor Patrick Alvarez, the co-directors of the HBO documentary Revolution Rent, debuting June 15th on HBO and HBO Max. If you have any questions regarding how you can become a documentary director and producer or other roles in the industry, I recommend you check out careersinfilm.com to learn more about careers in the film industry. I want to give a shout out to Sam and Joe at Inner Sound Audio, just outside of York, England. And a big thanks to Nevena Paunovic, our podcast manager at Alamo Pictures, who ensures we continue getting such great guests like Andy and Victor onto the show. And finally, a big thanks to our listeners. As always, we love to hear from you, so please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas, whether it is on YouTube, social media, or directly by email. And please remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off.
You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk.